Hi Zionsville, Mayor Emily Styron here, and I am joined by DPW Director Lantz, and we're going to chat a little bit about pedestrian safety.
Yes, something near and dear to many people's hearts, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of cool because today is, what is today?
The 15th?
The 15th,
Yes,
November 15th. You may not be watching this on November 15th, but today we had a town council meeting, and at that meeting we had a new pedestrian crossing proposed and approved by town council, and that's exciting.
Yes.
It's a great thing for the community in that area who have been looking for some safer routes to school, in particular with regard to pedestrian safety. But there's a lot that went into getting to today's vote and presentation. And I think you would all be interested to hear a little bit more about the steps that were taken prior to today's event. Lantz, could you start off by helping us understand a little bit more about what state law says about crosswalks?
Yeah, it's very important to keep in mind that there are governing standards to make things consistent across all communities. In the simplest sense, you want to make sure that a stop sign means a stop sign no matter where you are. And so the same applies to crosswalks. They are not fully understood on what rights and privileges are provided by a crosswalk at a mid-block location. You're just crossing in the middle of a road, no other traffic signals are around. So they have to mean the same in each community. Because they're kind of not fully understood by everyone, there's already that air of mystery about should I stop, should I not, what am I supposed to do? So we want to make sure whether you're on a very congested college campus where you have thousands of kids walking all the time, it needs to mean the same as it does on our little local roads here in Zionsville. So the state statute says that in these mid-block crosswalk locations, the car still has the right of way over pedestrians who are waiting to cross. And the simplest way I've always stated this is the state law says once you're upon the roadway, you as a pedestrian have made the decision that it's safe, you feel comfortable crossing the road. Once you're on that roadway, don't get hit, right? That's a pretty obvious statement, but that's what the state law says. What it doesn't say is that that pedestrian has the right to take that first step onto the roadway until the traffic is clear.
And that can be confusing for folks who see a pedestrian crossing, either the stripes on the ground or even the signage and other components that are put in place to help keep a pedestrian safe and to also help keep a driver alert to that kind of experience. But the key takeaway is be very careful when you are crossing a street and and it's heavily trafficked. Make sure you understand that you need to wait until it's a safe opportunity and then enter into that pedestrian crosswalk opportunity. So we talked a little bit about what state law says. Is there any other things that we can talk just generally about pedestrian safety and car safety as it relates to the two of those things coming together, pedestrians and cars?
Absolutely. We're creating a toxic cocktail, right? We're telling people cross the road here. And as I mentioned earlier, there is some confusion. If I'm a pedestrian waiting to cross a roadway and perhaps we have the push button activated flashers that go on and I push those and nobody's stopping and I'm getting mad. I'm like, why? I'm here, lights are flashing, yet some people aren't stopping. So as you said, there is no substitute for safety other than wait until it's cleared. So you never make any assumption that you're going to be protected by signs or lights or anything. So wait until traffic is either clear or fully stopped before you cross the road. It's common sense, but sometimes people confuse safety with convenience. So you might have to spend a little time there just to make sure all the drivers are aware of you. And that's the point of signage, is to say, hey, driver, pay attention. You are very likely to encounter someone on the roadway here. So the concept was mentioned this morning that we get sign fatigue, right? We're bombarded by lights and signs all the time. So you want to make sure these stand out, that we're offering the best notification to the drivers, that they have a better than average chance of finding someone on the roadway here. But just like you said, be safe, wait until it's clear.
And sometimes it really matters what else is going on during that attempted crossing. And if we're talking about a really busy period of time, like for example, at the start of the school day, when you might have parents driving their children to school, you may have bus riders who are, buses who are on the roadway. At the same time, you're gonna have people going to work, coming in and out, and then you add pedestrians to the mix. It just offers a whole lot of opportunities for us to practice being very cautious and diligent and understanding what our expectations are as it relates to crossing the street for pedestrians and bike riders. One thing that I've told my children when they were younger and traveling to school is if they're going to ride their bike, they need to walk their bikes across those pedestrian crossings. That was just me being kind of a cautious mom, but what are your thoughts about pedestrians and bicyclists and safe routes to school?
You're absolutely spot on. We're all guilty of it, right? We don't see any cars coming, so we're on our bike. I'm just going to dart across.
Yeah, if I just go faster,
of course,
I'll be safer.
Shoot the gap, right? But you're absolutely right, especially when it comes to roundabouts. And that's a little bit off topic, but we see a lot of people just head down, go for the gusto, get across.
Right.
You should always get off your bike, and you're not having to balance a bike. You brought up distracted driving, right? So people walking to school usually kind of coincides with, as you said, people are driving to work. So these drivers, they're paying attention really primarily, I don't want to rear end this guy in front of me. And, oh, there's a bus up there. Is he going to stop? So they're focused on maintaining their own safety. And then the periphery, we have pedestrians waiting to cross. It's kind of down the list of what's noticed. So that's why we want to make sure we have good and adequate and bright signage to alert these people, because really people are focused on driving.
Yes.
But you're absolutely spot on. The safest way is to get off your bike. You're not worried about falling over, tripping yourself. So absolutely, highly recommended.
Yep, good. So those are we're just trying to offer a couple of tips right now that we can use as discussion points in our own living rooms and over our own kitchen tables about pedestrian safety and how to be healthy and safe as we, get out on the roadways. I know that there are a number of different considerations when we start talking about crosswalks. And one of the things that we've discussed really for the last year and a half is how do we begin to look at opportunities to create these very specific crosswalking opportunities, specifically to help make it safer for those kids who are going to school and opting to not ride the bus. And I appreciate that your engineering team has done quite a bit to help create some planning mechanisms to help us look through how we engineer perhaps some of these pedestrian crosswalks. I really appreciate the data that you all have brought to bear when talking with a new committee that we've set up, the Pedestrian Mobility Access Committee.
Advisory
Committee. See,
access access has a very specific meaning in the pedestrian world, so we're using an
advisory committee. And this really came out of some discussions during the debates for the mayoral race back in 2019 that there's a lot of us who have been concerned about how do we actively participate in more pedestrian crosswalks and more opportunities like what we've been discussing through the PMAC. And today was the first opportunity that we had to bring some ideas to the town council and share with them some of the data and the work that this whole year we've been pursuing. Can you tell us a little bit about how really your team came up with some of the guardrails to help us understand, well, this makes sense, but this is not really the right opportunity for us to pursue?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a thought in the community that these crosswalks make things safer. But hopefully we've at least given people reason to think that, maybe they're not the panacea, they're going to solve everything, because you're mixing people with cars. So every traffic decision, traffic control, is set up by, there's some sort of metric, some sort of basis, some quantification of need, right? Because I think we'd all love to have a traffic signal at our subdivision entrance.
Stop
and
because I hear park the waters.
To have a crosswalk wherever we want to go.
Yeah.
So we have to be prudent and have a justifiable and data-driven process. So we really just grabbed that process that's outlined in some state manuals and federal manuals and determined through observations and some data, where do we fit? Because we're not going to reach a threshold that at a state level is going to say, yeah, you should probably put a flashing crosswalk sign at this location.
Right.
Because there's just so many, it takes so many, over 100 pedestrians per hour generally, before you can even start thinking based on there. So we just borrowed their methodology.
Right.
And by collecting data at different locations, we thought, where do we see, where are our busy locations for crosswalk, and what does busy mean to us? What is the number of pedestrians? So we set up our own threshold. Basically, if you don't have at least 10 pedestrians per peak hour of the day, there's really no point in talking about it, because you just got the occasional user.
Right.
So that, coupled with the volumes of vehicles on our road, we just came up with our own curve locally that we believe we have a reasonable expectation that we can actually achieve those numbers of pedestrians, but also be exclusive enough that we're not just plunking down crosswalks every block, which does disrupt traffic flow. So like I said this morning at our council meeting, we tend to think in the context of kids going to school and absolutely our precious resource, right? But remember, the guy who's jogging at 5:30 in the afternoon can activate these as well when everybody's coming home. So the adults, we have to be cognizant that we're putting controls in place that are there 24 hours a day.
Yes,
they
that's
could
true.
pop on at 2 in the morning for that night, the guy who can't sleep or the gal who can't sleep. So when you put something in place for 24 hours a day, you want to make sure that you've taken a scientific approach. So they just don't pop up everywhere.
Right. And frankly, if they were everywhere, we would start to diminish our thoughts in terms of how much do we really pay attention to that too. So it is something that there's a tension between pedestrian access and vehicular access, and what we don't want to do is to create a false sense of security or a place where we can end up having negative ramifications. I think that this particular crosswalk that the council approved today is a really smart first one.
I agree.
I think it makes a whole lot of sense. We've got neighborhoods on 2 different sides of the road with a trail system that goes under one side and over another. And that whole corridor right there includes an elementary school, a middle school, and our high school. So there's a lot coming together.
And one of the public comments made this morning is the Oak Ridge subdivision is connecting Turkey Foot to a park. So it is very reasonably expected that people could be using that not just from the internal subdivision, but they're going from point A to point B and happen to use this crosswalk. So that's what I spoke when I speak to network connectivity. This isn't just focused on one user group. There's not a defined group and a finite group that's going to benefit. This is benefits our entire network, because you're going to have people that are using this going from place to place.
So what should we expect for going forward now that we have engaged this committee that really we just kind of handpicked from across different parts of town to just help us give feedback and to also help spread the word about how this process works? What's next?
Well, everything, one of the benefits of that committee, everything's an opportunity for education, right? To share, so you have better informed people being part of the process. So we look to take at least 2 locations, targeting 2 locations a year. In our 3-tiered approach, we have a very high level scoring, which is like, it's kind of the no-brainer things. Is this 465? And we were thinking of putting a crosswalk across an interstate. It's that level of exclusion that occurs at that first level. The second level is data collection, where we actually will go out and count how many people are using it. And then the third is, assuming it's past the first 2 phases, the third is looking specifically at this location, what improvements need to be made, is there anything missing, is there anything that would foreclose on this opportunity, or what can we do to make it better? So we plan now to take a look at 2 locations a year.
2 locations a year.
One in the spring and one in the fall, because we do like to go out and capture at least a week's worth of data.
Right.
And we want to make sure we time that when the weather's good, when people are out walking actively, using sidewalks.
So
and
you're
pathways.
sort of trying to hit that peak time, right?
We want to know when we're going to get our maximum use. And we
Yeah.
also want to make sure that school's in session, it's on a school day.
Yep.
So that any influences of the school and kids going to, we're capturing that as well.
Right.
So that's why we'll look at the spring and the fall, and we're capturing around 60 hours of video. And really the only way then to count is to physically watch these videos. Of course, we can accelerate that, go rapidly, and we can hone in on those peak times, because that's all we're looking for. We're not looking for total uses, we're finding what's our busiest time.
Right.
So we can cull through that video pretty quickly, even though there are hours and hours of data. So we'll take a look at 2 intersections, spring and fall, and if they run successfully through our traps, then we will have an action like we did this morning with the town council, and present to them our findings. And at each of these 3 phases of our evaluation, we intend to engage the PMAC.
Yep.
Say, hey, this is what we're finding. So we think, hey, we need to keep going with this location. We think we got a good candidate, or we're finding a roadblock here. We don't advance. But it's that engagement, and we really wanted that committee to buy into the process more than anything, to understand what we're looking to do to quantify needs.
Yeah. So I suspect that after this is released, there are going to be a number of folks who want to know how they can be on the PMAC.
Call the mayor.
And what I would like is, if you are watching this and you have an interest in crosswalks or pedestrian safety, I'd love to hear from you. It may not result in being a part of the specific process, but I'd like to know what your interests are, where you feel like there might be an opportunity for a pedestrian crosswalk, or even education for an organization. Please let us know. Feel free to reach out directly to me at Styron, Styron, at zionsville-in.gov. Would love to be able to bring in as many voices into our consideration as we're going through this process. It is slow, as we've noted. It would really only be considered a couple of times a year, and it would just be 1 crosswalk during those considerations. So maybe we can grow with that as time moves on. But for right now, we're trying to what is really fast track the previous process, but still may seem pretty slow when everyone is going to feel pretty excited about the opportunity potentially of some more safe pedestrian crossings.
Well, now that we have our methodology in place, that was the biggest, time consideration. So
good.
Now we can kind of plug it into our machine, and crank out some results much more easily. And I think 2 locations here. Of course, we're a dynamic community, right? We have a new elementary opening up, so there are going to be things that are going to change, and things that may not be on someone's radar right now are going to be very soon, as development and schools continue to be built. So, we haven't said, hey, we've found a dozen and we've tested 8 and that's it. We're growing. So all these new locations, like to hear about those in case there's something out there that hasn't been brought to our attention. But the process is going to be continual, and I'm really excited about this, because it's been a struggle to find a justification for a community our size, and now that we have this framework, I'm really excited to put it to use.
I'm super grateful to you all for putting that framework together, and really excited as well. So that helps, hopefully you all understand a little bit more about the engineering, the engagement, and the costs that we have that go into determining when we might put in a pedestrian crossing. I also want to let you know that Lantz and his team are really working with Jared and the Parks Department in terms of how we continue to create more pedestrian opportunities for us along the streets and through our parks, through our pathway and trail system. And we've got great news from the Parks Department in terms of the expansion of our trail system, but we're also working on some ways to expand our pathway system as well. Is there anything that's maybe on the horizon from some developments coming up that we want to talk about, or are most of those still in a future state?
I think there are some good opportunities, and I would highlight that you have a new subdivision that's approved and being built, they're required to put in their own pathways along the perimeter roadways. And these days, our minimum standard is 10 feet. And that's really cool because, you know, when pathways 20 years ago began to emerge as a replacement for your standard concrete sidewalk, everybody thought 8 feet, you know, that's plenty, you know, you can land an airplane on that. But I think we see from our rail trail, our big four right here by Town Hall, that sometimes 8 feet can feel pretty confined when you've got multiple users, whether it's rollerblades, strollers. So all new development is required to put in their perimeter pathways. Then it becomes the job of the town to connect the dots. And those are challenging situations because usually it means we don't have the right of way. We don't have the public land to actually put a pathway in. So we have
or
to
there's an
require
impediment of some sort.
There's a creek, and you know, when you drive along a roadway, look on the side, look what's going on. You got utilities, you got drainage, you got dishes. And now try and put in a flat pathway in that terrain. So they can be very challenging to retrofit. But capitalizing on the development, that's where we're going to get the most mileage of our pathways built is on these subdivisions and new development. And then it's going to be our job to fill the gaps in.
So with this development of the Oak Street corridor, we're going to have a pathway along that, moving this direction too, aren't
There are a couple of development opportunities along Oak Street, which will, by process and arguably, provide some pathway. You always hear, well, there's nothing there now, but there always has to be that first pathway. You always got to start from a pathway that goes from nowhere to nowhere. If you don't start, you're never going to finish. So you will see these, you know, sections come along as development is approved and they meet their development requirements, and then we're going to have to fill in, like I said, we're going to fill in the gaps.
Excellent. Well, I know that your team does a lot to try to figure out what's happening under the ground, on top of the ground, and through all different types of places. And I appreciate the work you do, and really excited that this engineering group has given us more capacity to do things more quickly. Those 46 new parking spaces in the village is 100% thanks to your team.
Since you brought that up, we are expecting that to get striped this week if the weather holds out and everything else holds out and supply chains hold out and everything else you're hearing about why things can't be bought or businesses aren't open. So we're looking to get that striped hopefully on Wednesday, and once that occurs, I believe that's the last thing. We can open that up in time for the holiday season. So thank you for your drive and urging us to get that into place.
It's
and
exciting.
We thank the council for their funding. So
big team effort.
It was a big team effort, and how can you scoff at 46 new parking spaces, right?
Well, as you may have noticed, both Lance and I like to talk, so we'll let you get back to your regularly scheduled program. But happy that you tuned in today. Take it easy, Zionsville.